Welcome, everybody, to Dead Talk Live. I am your host, Viz, and today we are joined by Damon Thomas, who is the director of the new movie called My Best Friend's Exorcism, which is available today on Amazon Prime Video. Damon, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. So nice to be here.
It is a pleasure to talk with you. I saw this film within the last several days, and just like I told you, we went live. I really enjoyed it. Lighthearted horror, it's creepy, but lighthearted and a lot of fun elements to it. So we'll break it down. But this is an adaptation from Grady Hendrix' novel that was written into a screenplay by Jenna Lamia. At which point did you get involved in this project?
Uh, I got sent the script back in 2019, so I hadn't read the book then. So that was my introduction to Grady Hendrix, was the script, the adaptation. And to be honest with you, I just love the title. It's just one of the best titles there is. You know, My Best Friend's Exorcism, and kind of you know what you're getting involved in.
Yeah.
And then I really enjoyed the setting of the 80s. And I really liked the friendship story. I liked that it was a story of friendship and how friendship triumphs. So all wrapped up in a demonic possession, of course.
Of course, you got to add that twist. Now, when it comes to directing, which you have done a lot of, when it comes to source material, when you come in as a director, do you let the source material affect you? Do you go to it as a sort of a reference point, or do you sort of kind of push it out of your mind and see your own vision for the project?
I suppose as a director, the script is the script, and so
Hmm.
that is your primary focus. I was obviously just interested to read the book and see how, you know, uh, who the characters were, whether the same, and how the story had sort of deviated. I think when you do an adaptation, it becomes its own animal.
Hmm.
It starts its own life, and that may be frustrating for purists about the book, as with all adaptations. But in the end, you are making a movie, and
Yeah,
a movie has to sort of deliver certain things, especially when you're making it for Amazon. They want a certain kind of movie. Obviously, I have a big influence, and obviously on how it's made and the tone of it. But those are constant and evolving discussions that start right from the beginning,
exactly.
and and then there's so many other factors that come into play when you're making a movie. You're just presented with so many sort of roadblocks on the way that you sort of have to navigate and be sort of light of foot about. Uh, uh,
And at
yeah,
the end of the day, the screenplay takes a life of its own, and I think that's great, you
yeah,
know?
it really is true, and uh, you know, it sometimes with genre, it's a very interesting thing in that there's certain people that kind of go, "Oh, it's not scary enough," or "It's not like this." But in a way, say The Exorcist is like the benchmark. So
Hmm.
you know, um, so it's kind of there are tropes. So you either sort of embrace the tropes or you sort of reject them. And the thing is, you don't want to just make a carbon copy of another movie, do you? You
No.
don't. You're trying to, so I think these days we're so film literate, so that you'll start watching a drama, a movie, a TV series, and you'll go, those two people get together.
Yeah.
That guy, he's the evil one. He's going to turn bad, and that guy's going to get killed. you,
I
you
know
you
exactly
know
what you're
you know
talking about. Yeah, yeah. That happens with me and my wife when we're on the couch watching a television show. You can sort of predict how it's going to go. Now, you mentioned the film is set in the 80s, but the 80s is not detrimental to the story itself. Were there any discussions to modernizing the film to today, modern day?
No, no. Do you know what though? I think that setting it in the 80s, which the book is set in the 80s, it kind of uh, it takes out of you don't have to have information carried through mobile phones. Anything now set in modern day,
Hmm.
half the time is people being on the phone, seeing phone screens, and also we have access to so much more information. I
Yeah.
mean, back in the 80s, I lived through that. It was a big decade in my life, and you, like even finding out about music, there were like dedicated shows. There was the radio, which is so important. You used to like record off the radio to hear your favorite
Yeah.
song, and
Mixtapes.
tapes. You could never find any information. You either had to have join a fan club if there one existed, and you sort of just had these tiny little moments, and it was a bit like all information about anything. And I think it's sort of it kind of highlights, in the film, each of the characters has a kind of issue of like either body image. I think if it was set now, we would have to frame it with all the open discussion that really happens now.
Exactly.
And sometimes that's interesting, is to remember where we've come from, what life was like, 40 years ago and
And
35 years ago.
and showing it to today's generation. This what life was like 40 years ago. Now, I have to ask you this question. In the opening few minutes of the film, there's a reference made to Boy George from the group Culture Club, where one of the girls has a crush on Boy George. And it's
Yeah.
sort of that little nuggets throughout the whole film that really take us back for those of us that lived through the 80s. What'd you think of that part with the whole Boy George crush thing? What I did after I immediately saw that, I paused the film and I sort of surveyed the women who were, lived through the 80s. I'm like, did you have a crush on Boy George or know anybody? Another girl who had a crush on Boy George. What did you think when you read that little bit of the script?
Well, the thing is, when Boy George kind of first appeared, he caused a huge stir, much in the same way that David Bowie caused a huge stir when he first appeared on Top of the Pops.
Yeah.
People were scandalized by the fact that when David Bowie leant against his guitar player and kind of rubbed shoulders with him, people were like, oh my God, what are we looking at?
Yeah.
And we feel that as like nothing now, would we? We wouldn't even bat an eyelid to that. And I think the thing about when Boy George first, it was like, is he a boy? Is he a girl? He's so exciting. It just felt like a new frontier.
Exactly.
And we sort of forget. And that's why it's really interesting when you, like you were saying before, just looking back, things were different, weren't they? They were really different. And we're still evolving, aren't we, all the time? Sexuality is such a complicated and ever-evolving conversation. And back there, everything was much more simple. I mean, people just kind of lived quite more straightforwardly, and that you really didn't have any discussions about things to do with sexuality, emotions. People used to make jokes about men talking about emotions.
Exactly.
And I think that it's kind of interesting, and that's one of the. It allows you to sort of simplify things, because otherwise now it'd be such a complicated kind of conversation that it would be harder to focus in on their individual stories.
Absolutely. So let's focus in on some elements of the film. The owl. The owl is seen a lot throughout the film. Not only the bird, drugs. For you, what did the owl represent?
Well, it's the symbol of Andras, the demon. That's his symbol. That's what symbolizes it. That's it. So it's just a kind of nod, and to have a presence that when he's near, his influence is near, that you see more owls. And that was just a way that we kind of brought that story in.
And when you integrated it into that little scene with the drugs, is that also sort of like a little Easter egg that,
Yeah, of course.
Don't do drugs, Nancy Reagan at the time.
It's like whereas the tendrils of his influence moving into,
Exactly. Now, Elsie Fisher and Amaya Miller play the two leads. They really captured the time period. What was your experience directing them? These are not new faces to the screen. They have been acting for a long, long time. So what was your experience with those two girls?
Fantastic. Elsie was, top of our list for Abby right from the get-go. I'd really loved her in 8th grade and thought her naturalism was just fantastic. And then we went on a search for, Gretchen. And actually, Amaya came in quite late into that search. And I did of course, it was in the pandemic, so everything was done like this virtually.
Yeah.
And she sort of scared me actually when she did. I got her to do an extract from the Exorcism, and she just totally went for it. And I was like going, wow. And so we did a chemistry read on Zoom with Elsie, and that we thought, I thought they worked really well together. So that was great. Then we sort of expanded out for them. As in terms of working with them, they're just professionals. They're great to work with. They're generous. They're fun.
Mm-hmm.
They like all four of them just became friends as they sort of the movie went along, which is really fantastic to see.
And that chemistry between Abby and Gretchen, if that doesn't work, the film doesn't work. So obviously, as a director, that was very, very important for you. How difficult? I mean, you told us how Gretchen, you saw her and she just captivated you. Did you go through a lot of people before you found your Gretchen? Yeah.
Yeah, huge. Yeah.
Okay.
Everyone these days, because of the pandemic, but the modern way now is that everyone self-tapes. So, saw a lot, and also for Christian Lemon, that Chris Lowell.
Yeah.
Because that part you have to have kind of comedy bones.
Mm-hmm.
You have to know how to do that role, and he just knew how to do it. And so.
Let's talk about the Lemon Brothers, okay?
Yeah.
Very fun. Traveling Christian fitness motivational speakers, I guess is a way to summarize them. Was there a particular way that you wanted to develop those three brothers, their relationship?
Well, first off, there were powerlifting kind of like religious weightlifters in the 80s. It was a thing. They would do tours and they would lift weights for the Lord. And it was a thing. If you go on YouTube and just put that in the search engine, you will find them. And so they were a bit more small. Some of those people toured kind of very big spaces. Mm-hmm. And so that we scaled them down, made them probably a little bit sadder with kind of not very good fireworks. And they played, everyone's living the dream, aren't they?
I thought the concrete on the chest was pretty dramatic.
Yeah, it was good, right?
Definitely.
And so I think that one of the things I encouraged Jenna to do was to make him a bit more three-dimensional as a character, so that when he did the Exorcism, his joy at making it happen partially was a real joy. And you really feel that from him, when he goes, yes, it has that moment. And it's what I like about it, what I'm really interested in is the juxtaposition between, like the horror and then just the comedy, the relief right next to it.
Yeah.
It's something he did in Killing Eve and Dracula. So it was just to kind of make him 3D that he was bullied by his brothers. Yeah. And, he was desperate to prove himself.
And find his own identity.
Exactly. And so that, when I just really wanted to see this image of him bringing the cross down in the mall on the escalators. And
that was awesome.
And he just brought it alive by just finger drumming on it, the cross, as he's coming down the escalators, sort of doing a little song to himself. And, that is very, I think the thing about tone, and some people may disagree, but it's all about truth. If you create a three-dimensional character, if they're true to themselves, even if that character is a strong flavor, for me, that's when it works. Mm-hmm. It's when you start giving people just gags that you could go, I can give that line to the other character and it still works. And then you sort of think, well, it's got to work just for them. Then we know we've got the character right.
Absolutely.
And I think that, for me, I could have just done, people go, well, it's not scary enough. But the thing is, we've got The Exorcist. We've got a lot of films that
Yeah.
deal with exorcisms, and they're dark and they're scary. And I thought, we haven't had one which has this tone. And the thing is, you sort of get criticized for doing something that's different or not. People kind of go with you and go, like, this is great.
Yeah.
But some people go, like, well, why isn't it just really serious? It's like, well, there's quite a lot of those films. This is what this one is. This is just different.
Exactly. You got to see it for what it is, what it's meant to be. Let's talk a little bit about the satire
Yeah.
versus reality. Now, I totally see today's youth generation looking at this, and looking at the 80s portrayed through this film and saying, wow, this is funny, way off into the satire universe. But the reality is, there is satire here, but a lot of it was pretty true for what the 80s was like. Um, so when
Yeah.
people ask you, like I'm about to, and other people are going to ask you as days roll on about the satire aspect, what are your thoughts? How much of it did you want to push over the line and to the really ridiculous funny in satire? And how much did you really want to capture the mindset of what it was like back in the 1980s?
Yeah, I suppose it comes back to what I was just saying before about flavors of characters. I think we all have friends who are quite strong flavors, and so they kind of seem a bit larger than life. But I think that in terms of making commentary about the times, I think the script does do that in the way that the language that is used, the way that the four girls talk to each other.
Yeah.
Right from the beginning. People were quite blunt in those days. People just kind of said things, and sort of, nowadays we'd have much greater sensitivity.
Mm-hmm.
We would literally go, "Oh, I can't say that. I can't."
Yeah.
But people did say just quite rude things quite often,
Yeah.
just because we didn't have a sophisticated emotional conversation that we do now.
No.
Like friends now will talk about their emotions. Back then, especially guys.
Mm-hmm.
It was just only banter. That's
it. That's it.
That was it.
Exactly.
It was, your dad, my father. You didn't have you wouldn't sort of break down and have a cry with you.
No.
It was, and I think that it's just those things I thought were quite truthful, because I was there and I remember certain conversations you used to have, and people were quite brutal with each other.
Oh yeah.
And so I think that is quite truthful about. Now you could sort of say, well, why don't you do it with a modern spin? But that's, in a way, it's not what this is about. This is set in the 80s. Otherwise, you're doing a completely different film. It's complete. That's not the book. So you might as well then not do an adaptation, because that's not the book. So the book is those characters,
And the people watching this film today have to realize, who were not around when the internet was not around, that your world back then was the people around you. Now, literally, the entire world can be your audience. And that changes things dramatically. Abby is a very self-conscious girl. Do you think Gretchen appreciates Abby the way Abby appreciates Gretchen?
Well, there's dynamics in a group like there are in all friendship groups. So you have the sort of two alpha characters, which are Gretchen and Margaret. But Margaret's a sort of sporty alpha. She's the sort of, quite blunt. And Gretchen is they sort of slightly vie for positions. And then they have their kind of wing women who are sort of Glee and Abby, sort of supporting the kind of power structure. Exactly. And I think that happens in real life within groups, doesn't it? It's a sort of true dynamic.
Yeah.
So I think that was something that was sort of interesting, and again, I think sort of truthful. One thing I think was I was really interested in the friendship story, and I think that's kind of something that's quite important now, because, since the pandemic, people have, got sort of maybe become more antisocial.
Yeah, more
And
withdrawn,
I
introverted.
think that friendship is actually really important for all of
Hmm.
us. And in studies about happiness, one of the two things that come out is one is about friendship. Like friends are great for you, really good for you, and being outdoors. If you can be outdoors with friends,
Yeah,
and I think that we do far less of both now. And if that kind of is one of the things I think people take away from the film is the friendship is important, and it will probably save the day for you.
exactly. At the end of the day, we are social creatures. We're almost out of time, but I do have to ask you, and for the people to know that you have directed some very popular TV shows, Killing Eve and
Yeah,
Penny Dreadful. Now, for me, Penny Dreadful, I love both Killing Eve and Penny Dreadful. Penny Dreadful, I love that show. It has a really special place for me. You
fantastic.
directed the next to last episode for to the series finale. If you were to like compare Penny Dreadful, Killing Eve in your career as a director, where do they sit for you?
Uh, in terms of importance or like what I
You
felt about
know, some projects just have a special place in directors' hearts for one reason or another.
you as a career you sort of as a director you don't get offered all the projects in the world.
Yeah,
You kind of get set on a pathway and then suddenly things come into your orbit and people go, oh, he does that sort of like ghosty sort of supernatural maybe, it
yeah,
kind of comes your way. And John Logan, who wrote that, it was very beautifully written as a show and probably maybe a bit underappreciated. It's sort of maybe not seen as mainstream. And I thought that, Ava Green was phenomenal in
oh
it.
my
Just
God.
wasn't and should have maybe been Emmy nominated in the first season. So it was great to work with such a great, Hollywood writer as John, and then to go on to a show like Killing Eve, which kind of had that Coen Brothers quality, but also represented a new kind of female character, which is, men have often played amoral characters where
Yeah,
they do really bad things, good things, but we still like them. And women didn't. I didn't. They do now, but
yeah,
Villanelle was just like, she was an assassin. She regularly stepped over the line.
yeah,
And I think that was such an exciting thing as a director to work one with Phoebe Waller-Bridge and with Jodie and Sandra and Fiona Shaw. Just to work with that caliber actors with that kind of script, and I really like that tone.
oh yeah,
Which I took forward into things like Dracula. Yeah, and you have to have. Some people don't like that tone. They don't. They find that they just want drama to be serious, or they want funny to be
yeah,
funny. I mean, and it's just not their thing, and it's quite divisive. And it's the same with genre, isn't it? So people go like, "Well, it's not scary enough."
yeah,
But I didn't want this. I didn't want this My Best Friend's Exorcism to be like suddenly go really super dark, because I think I really wanted it to feel like a lost film from the 80s that you kind of,
yeah,
stylistically, if you look at something like Heathers, which is at the time, do you remember it was really dark, wasn't it? Felt like,
yeah.
oh my God, what is he doing? And if you actually rewatch it, it's quite straightforward in the way that it's shot.
I mean, Christian Slater's character in that, I mean, he was labeled a psychopath, everything.
Wasn't it?
Yeah,
We found, it's going back to those things like Boy George. It's hard to sort of make, young people of today feel that reaction because it's not their era. They won't feel that. And
it's a
hard
totally
to sort of
different world.
Yeah. I mean, it was a bit like talking to the cast about Ouija boards and about. We used to think they were quite spooky back in the 80s. If someone got the Ouija board out, we would sort of laugh and sort of try to pretend that we didn't find it scary.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And
but in reality, everybody was really just scared out of their wits.
Yeah.
They just wouldn't admit it.
Yeah, exactly. So, so getting back to the whole sort of career thing, it's been great to, I'm just things that come into my orbit. I'm just always looking for just good writing. You're just looking for something that you can possibly make a little bit different to what's gone before. That it's going to divide taste. How many? I mean, the internet has a million people with a million viewpoints. So all you can do is just try to do something that's interesting, maybe takes the genre somewhere a little bit new, which I think hopefully this does.
Yeah.
That Exorcism scene. It was great last night. We watched the premiere of it. It had like 300 people. And it was great to watch it with a whole group of people just responding in the way that you thought it should, would happen, would love for it to happen. And it sort of did. And also to find things, react to things you never thought people would react to so strongly.
And what a lot of people don't notice is the actual tone of, I'm not talking about story, the way it's filmed. Like, my best friend's Exorcism has a very light, tone that you put to it as a director with the lighting, except when they go into the woods where it's supposed to be scary and into that abandoned shack, and then it gets dark, and then it goes back to being bright, sunny, daylight. And that really affects, even though the viewer may not notice it, it affects how they perceive the overall tone and feeling of the movie. And I think you did a brilliant job at it. And I mean, you're a great director. It's in your body of work and all the shows, the movies you've done. This is a great film. I encourage everybody to watch it. It premiered today on Amazon Prime Video. It's available right now. It's called My Best Friend's Exorcism, directed by our guest here, Damon Thomas. Damon, I want to thank you so much for being our guest today. Do you have any final thoughts you want to share before we go?
Well, thank you, Juan, for having me on, and thank you for your kind words. You're trying to make me blush. I think one thing you were just talking about there, about light and dark, is that, with genre, there are like tropes, aren't there? There are things that you, like the double scare, like the first scare, the second scare, the jump scares, putting your hands into the dark, the dark corridors. And I think that you, one as a director, you sort of either have to embrace them or you sort of reject them, to try and do different things. But I think that was, I was pleased that you pointed that out.
Yeah, because it's blended in perfectly. The scenes that are meant to be dark are dark, and the other, when they're outside, it has that light tone. And you've seen other movies where they are outside, it is sunny outside, but it still has that dark tone to it. Yeah. And I think you did a brilliant job. Thank you so much for being on here with us. I want to thank our audience, those who are tuning in live and those who will be watching this later on. Again, the movie's called My Best Friend's Exorcism, available right now on Amazon Prime Video. Damon, thank you. On behalf of Damon and myself, stay safe and stay walking. Bye-bye, everybody.